The rain wasn't just falling. It was hammering against the pavement, soaking through my jacket in seconds. I stood on the porch, my hands shaking, not from the cold, but from exhaustion. I had been gone for 6 weeks on a grueling engineering contract in the middle of nowhere, sleeping on a cot and eating canned food. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of this moment, unlocking the front door of the house my dad, Donald, had built with his own 2 hands. I jammed the key into the deadbolt and twisted. It stuck. I frowned, wiggling it, trying to force it, but the mechanism wouldn't budge. My heart sank. Suddenly, the door swung open, but it didn't open all the way. The security chain caught it with a sharp, metallic clack. My mother, Marissa, peered out through the crack. She didn't look relieved to see her son home safe. She looked annoyed, like I was a solicitor interrupting her dinner. Behind her, a man I barely knew, Vince, walked into the hallway. My blood ran cold. He was wearing my father's favorite red flannel bathrobe, holding my father's coffee mug. "Mom, the key didn't work," I stammered, water dripping from my nose onto the welcome mat. "The locks were changed, Jason," she said coldly, making no move to unhook the chain. "The house was simply too much work for me. I sold it last week to a private equity firm while you were gone. They're letting us rent it back. You don't live here anymore. You sold Dad's house." I choked out, the shock hitting me harder than the freezing rain. Vince chuckled, taking a loud sip of coffee. "Beat it, kid. Tenants only." They slammed the door in my face. The sound echoed in my chest like a gunshot. Before we continue, if you love our stories, do well to encourage us by hitting the like button, sharing, and subscribing for more. My name is Jason. I'm 29 years old, a structural engineer, and the only son of a man who prized loyalty above all else. And in the span of 30 seconds, my mother had erased my inheritance and replaced me with her deadbeat boyfriend. I stood there shivering, realizing that the cold I felt wasn't from the weather. It was from the realization that I was officially homeless. To understand why that door slam shattered my entire world, you have to understand what this house meant. It wasn't just wood, brick, and mortar to us. It was him. 3 years ago, my dad stood in that exact same hallway, teaching me how to restore the original oak banister. I could still smell the sawdust and the varnish. I remembered how my hands were raw from sanding for hours, my back aching. He had fought tooth and nail to keep the house in the divorce settlement years ago because, as he put it, "Your mother likes money more than memories, Jason. If she gets this place, she'll turn it into cash before my body is cold." He looked at me that day, his eyes serious and full of a fierce, protective love. "I'm working myself to the bone on this place for a reason. No matter what happens to me, this house is your future. It's your safety net. As long as you have this roof, you'll never be out in the cold." He died of a sudden, massive heart attack 2 months ago. At the funeral, while I was holding back tears and greeting guests, I saw Marissa in the back row. She wasn't crying. She was scrolling through Zillow on her phone, checking property values in the neighborhood. I should have known then. I should have taken the keys and never let them go. But I trusted her because she was my mother. I thought grief would make her a better person. Instead, it just made her hungry for cash. As I stood in the rain, remembering his promise, I realized she hadn't just sold a building. She had sold his legacy. The betrayal was calculated with terrifying precision. Marissa knew I would fight her to the death if I knew she was selling, so she started the process before I even left town. I later learned she had filed emergency probate paperwork the day after the funeral, while I was still writing the eulogy. By the time I left for my mandatory 6-week work trip, the sale was already pending. As the executor, she claimed the estate was insolvent, completely broke. She told the court Dad had massive secret debts and medical bills that needed immediate payment. It was a lie. Dad was debt-free and had excellent health insurance. The real debt belonged to Vince. He owed Sharks a staggering amount of money from a failed gambling habit and some bad business deals. Marissa staged a fire sale to a predatory investment firm for quick, liquid cash to save him. But here is the kicker, the part that makes my blood boil. The sale price was $500,000, but Vince's debts were nearly $450,000. She paid off his Sharks and was left with just enough cash to live like a queen for a few months. She sold my future, my entire inheritance, just to buy Vince's freedom. I didn't find out the specifics until I was already locked out. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I dragged my suitcase to the curb, the wheels struggling in the rain. It was a text from our neighbor, Mrs. Gable. "Jason, honey, why is there a massive dumpster in your dad's driveway? They're throwing away his books. I saw them tossing his encyclopedias. That night, I slept in a cheap motel room that smelled like stale cigarettes, bleach, and despair. I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling, plotting. The next morning, fueled by caffeine and pure anger, I went straight to Mr. Henderson, my father's old attorney. He looked furious when I told him what happened. He slammed a file onto his desk. "She rushed probate," he muttered, aggressively flipping through the papers. "She claimed you waived your rights to the house. She filed an affidavit saying you couldn't be reached. I never signed anything," I yelled, slamming my hand on his desk so hard it stung. "I was working." "I know," Henderson said, his voice dropping to a calm, dangerous register. Then, he opened a locked drawer in his mahogany desk. "Your father knew Marissa better than you did, Jason. He anticipated something like this might happen." He slid a thick, heavy folder across the desk. "Donald left a separate life insurance policy. The beneficiary is you, and only you. Marissa doesn't know it exists because they were divorced when he took it out. It's for $650,000 tax-free." I stared at the check. It was enough to buy a nice condo, but I didn't want a condo. I wanted my house. I want to sue her. I want to undo the sale and get the deed back. Henderson shook his head. "Probate court takes years. By the time we win, Vince will have trashed the place or sold it again. The house will rot." He leaned forward, a shark-like grin forming on his face. "Or, we can play dirty legally." "What do you mean play dirty?" I asked, wiping my face, trying to focus through the lack of sleep. Henderson turned his computer monitor so I could see. The house was purchased by Obsidian Holdings LLC. It sounds like a big corporation, but I did some digging this morning. Obsidian uses single-asset LLCs for their purchases. That means this specific company exists solely to hold the deed to your father's house. It has no other assets, no other liabilities, and no other employees. He pointed to their financials on the screen. They don't care about the house, Jason. They don't care about your dad's legacy or the oak banister. They just want a 15% return on their investment. They bought it cheap, and they want to hold it for passive income or flip it for a quick buck. My heart started pounding against my ribs. "So they have a price." "Everyone has a price," Henderson said. "With this insurance money, you have enough liquid cash to make an aggressive offer. We don't buy the house from them. That takes too long. We buy the membership interest of the LLC. If we buy the company, we own the assets. If we own the LLC, we own the house." I didn't hesitate for a second. "Do it. Use every cent. I want that company." 3 days later, I sat in Henderson's office as the confirmation came through. The investors took the quick profit and ran. They didn't care who the buyer was. I looked at the documents in front of me. I wasn't just Jason anymore. I was the anonymous owner of Obsidian Holdings. I owned the company. I owned the lease. And most importantly, I owned the house my mother was sleeping in. The ink was barely dry on the paperwork when the transfer of ownership was finalized. Legally, on public records, the house now belonged to Obsidian Holdings LLC. But privately, the sole signatory for that LLC was me, Jason. I was officially my mother's landlord, and she had absolutely no idea. I sat in my lawyer's office and reviewed the lease agreement Marissa had signed with the previous owners. It was standard but strict, designed to protect the property value. It had clear clauses. No smoking inside or on the porch. No pets allowed. No structural changes without written permission. And most importantly, unauthorized guests may not stay for more than 3 consecutive nights. Marissa had signed it without reading the fine print. She was too arrogant, too sure of herself. That afternoon, she called me, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I hope you found a place to stay, Jason. I feel terrible, but we had to do what was best for us. Don't worry about us, though. The new owners are just some corporate idiots in a skyscraper somewhere. They'll never check on us. We practically own the place." I held the phone tight, my knuckles turning white. "You think so?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, fighting the urge to tell her everything. "Oh, I know so," she laughed. "They just want the rent check. As long as we pay, we can do whatever we want." I whispered to myself after I hung up. "Oh, I'll be checking." A few nights later, I drove by the house. I had rented a nondescript gray sedan, so they wouldn't recognize my car. I parked across the street, hidden by the shadows of the large oak tree my dad and I used to sit under on summer evenings. What I saw made my stomach turn. There was a pile of debris on the front lawn. It wasn't just trash, it was construction waste. I squinted through the darkness and felt a lump form in my throat. Sitting on top of the heap was the hand-carved oak banister. My dad had spent 3 months restoring that wood, stripping layers of paint to reveal the grain, polishing it until it shone. Now it was snapped in half, discarded like garbage. Through the front window, I could see bright, harsh construction lights. They were ripping out the old stuff to make the house look modern and trendy. I wanted to storm in there and scream. I wanted to drag Vince out by his collar and throw him off the property. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I acted emotionally, I would lose the legal upper hand. I took a deep breath, pulled out my camera with a telephoto lens, and started snapping photos. Every piece of debris, every unauthorized renovation, every scratch on the floor, it was all evidence. Then, the front door opened. Vince stepped onto the porch. He lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and flicked the ash onto the wooden deck. Click. Another violation documented. I didn't wait. The next morning, acting as the property manager for Obsidian Holdings, I drafted a formal notice to cure. It was professional, cold, and direct. It cited the lease violation regarding smoking on the premises and the unauthorized accumulation of trash on the lawn. It demanded immediate rectification within 72 hours. I sent it via courier, so I would get a delivery confirmation. Then, I went back to my stakeout spot to watch the fallout. I wanted to see if they would take it seriously or if their arrogance would be their downfall. When the courier handed the envelope to Marissa, she looked confused. She opened it on the porch, scanned the paper, and then rolled her eyes. She went back inside, and a moment later, Vince came out holding the letter. He crumpled it up into a ball. I watched through my windshield, disbelief washing over me. He didn't just throw it away. He pulled out his lighter, set the corner of the official legal notice on fire, and used the flame to light his next cigarette. He laughed, tossing the burning paper onto the driveway. "It's just a form letter, babe." I heard him yell back into the house. "Ignore it. They aren't going to drive out here for a little trash." They thought they were untouchable. They had no idea they had just handed me more ammunition. The smoking was bad, but I needed something undeniable to break the lease without a long court battle. I needed proof of unauthorized occupancy. The lease listed only Marissa as a tenant. Vince was legally a ghost. He wasn't on the paperwork, and his bad credit score would have disqualified him anyway. I hired a professional private investigator, a guy named Miller who used to be a cop. I told him, "I need proof that the man living there isn't a guest. I need proof he's moved in permanently." Miller didn't disappoint. 3 days later, he sent me a folder of digital files. He had footage of Vince moving a U-Haul's worth of furniture into the garage. He had photos of Vince receiving mail at the address. But the worst part was the dog. They had brought in a massive, aggressive Rottweiler, strictly forbidden in the lease. In one of the photos, the dog was scratching deep gouges into the front door. Then Miller called me. "You might want to sit down for this last part, Jason." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "They aren't just renovating," Miller said. "They're painting the brick fireplace white. The natural stone is gone. They covered it with cheap latex paint." I saw red. That stone was imported. Dad loved that fireplace. We used to roast marshmallows there. They were erasing him, layer by layer. "Keep watching them," I told Miller. "I'm going to bury them." 2 months passed. I had a stack of violations an inch thick, but I was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I wanted the eviction to be swift and absolute. And then, they handed me the final weapon I needed. Marissa decided she was tired of paying rent. I monitored the bank account for Obsidian Holdings on the 1st of the month. The rent was due. Midnight came and went. No deposit. The $50,000 surplus they had from the house sale was already gone. I saw a brand new lease-to-own sports car in the driveway, and I found out later from a neighbor that Vince was bragging at the local bar that they were screwing the corporate landlords to save cash for a trip to Cabo. They were broke again, and Vince had convinced Marissa that eviction took months in our state. He told her, "Why pay the rent? By the time they file the paperwork, we'll be back from vacation, and we can negotiate a payment plan." It was the most arrogant, foolish mistake they could have made. They weren't dealing with a faceless bureaucracy that would lose their file or forget to check the ledger. They were dealing with a son who checked the account every hour. I sat at my laptop, staring at the zero balance. A slow smile spread across my face. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were stealing a vacation. But in reality, They had just breached the most critical clause of the contract. Gotcha, I whispered. I clicked open the file for the pay or quit notice. The trap was finally set. Before I tell you how I used their own arrogance to set the trap for the final eviction showdown, I have to ask, if you are rooting for justice for me and my late father, please hit that like button. Share this story with anyone who loves seeing the underdog win. And subscribe so you don't miss the moment my mother and Vince get exactly what they deserve. Also, tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven your family, or would you destroy them? Let's get back to the story. I didn't waste a second. As the owner of Obsidian Holdings, I issued a formal pay or quit notice. It gave them 3 days to pay the missing rent or face legal action. But instead of paying, my mother called me, her son, to gloat. "Jason, guess what?" she chirped, the sound of wind and ocean waves blowing into the phone. "Vince and I are in Cabo. We decided we deserved a break from all the stress of the renovations." I sat in my dark apartment, eating instant noodles to save money for the legal fees. "Mom, that sounds expensive. Did you pay the rent before you left?" She laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Oh, forget the rent. Vince says the landlord can't touch us while we're out of the country. He says it takes them 90 days to do anything. By the time we get back, we'll figure something out. We're living it up." She was burning through the last of my father's money on a vacation while stiffing the very company I bought to save her home. I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to scream, "I am the landlord. You are stealing from me." "Be careful, Mom," I said, my voice low and trembling. "Corporate landlords can be ruthless. If you don't pay, you might not have a home to come back to." "Don't be such a worrier," she scoffed and hung up on me. She had no idea she had just sealed her fate. With them out of the country, I legally entered the property for an emergency inspection, citing a suspected water leak. I unlocked the door with the master key, my heart pounding in my ears. The smell hit me first, stale beer, wet dog, and something chemical. I walked into the living room and gasped. It was a disaster. There were red wine stains on the cream carpet. Holes had been punched into the drywall. My dad's study, his sanctuary where he read every evening, had been gutted and turned into a gaming room for Vince, with wires stapled to the antique molding. It looked like they were finally clearing out the attic storage to make room for ventilation for whatever they were doing in the garage. In the kitchen trash bin, resting on top of a greasy pizza box, was a frame. I pulled it out. It was my father's military medals. They hadn't just packed them away. They had thrown them out like garbage in their haste to renovate. I fell to my knees, clutching the frame, tears of pure rage stinging my eyes. That was it. No more mercy. I didn't fix a leak because there wasn't one. Instead, I took a piece of paper and taped it directly to the center of their massive TV screen. It read, "Inspection failed. Lease termination pending." When Marissa and Vince returned from Cabo, the tan faded from their faces instantly. They found the notice on the TV. But instead of feeling shame or fear, Vince got aggressive. He was the type of guy who thought he was smarter than everyone else because he read a few articles online. Vince went onto a tenant rights forum and downloaded a generic legal template. He convinced my mother that they were the victims here. They drafted a letter to Obsidian Holdings, threatening to sue the company for harassment, illegal entry, and creating unlivable conditions. The audacity was breathtaking. They demanded $10,000 in cash from the LLC to settle the harassment claim, or they would go to the press and ruin the company's reputation. My lawyer, Henderson, called me, sounding almost impressed by their stupidity. "Jason, they're trying to blackmail you. They are trying to extort money from the owner. Using the money they saved by not paying you rent. They want to fight," I said, looking at the photos of my dad's medals I had rescued from the garbage. "They're going to get a war. Set up the meeting. Tell them the owner is coming to negotiate." For a moment, I wobbled. Panic set in. If they actually filed a lawsuit, my identity as the owner of the LLC might come out during the discovery phase of court. If Marissa found out I was the landlord before I could evict her, she would play the victim card to the whole family. She would spin it that I was the bad guy, the ungrateful son kicking his mother out. Then, Vince made a fatal error. To show off to his friends, he started live streaming his new gaming setup on social media. He was mocking the stupid management company, walking around the house. I watched the video on repeat, analyzing every frame. Then I saw it. He didn't realize that the reflection in his computer monitor showed the open garage door behind him. Through the reflection, I saw intense purple grow lights and tall, leafy green plants. I paused the video and zoomed in. It wasn't a few potted plants. It was a full-scale, high-quantity illegal grow operation. "That's not a lease violation," I said to the empty room, a cold chill running down my spine. "That's a felony." I could have called the police right then. I could have had them arrested and the house seized. But if the police raided the house, my dad's property would be tied up in a criminal investigation for months as a crime scene. I needed them out now. And I wanted the satisfaction of seeing their faces when they realized who beat them. I decided to set a trap. I instructed Henderson to reply to their threats. We agreed to a settlement meeting at the house to discuss their demands and the $10,000 payout. The bait worked. Marissa thought she had won. She called me, sounding ecstatic. "Jason, Vince is a genius. We scared the landlord. They're coming to negotiate. We're going to get paid." "That's great, Mom," I said. "I'll be stopping by later to pick up some of my old stuff." "Not today, Jason. We have a meeting," she said. "Don't worry," I replied. "I won't get in the way." I hung up and walked to my closet. I didn't put on my work clothes. I put on my best charcoal suit. I checked the deed in my briefcase one last time. It's showtime. The day of the meeting arrived with a heavy gray sky. Inside the house, however, the mood was celebratory. Marissa and Vince sat at the mahogany dining table, my father's table, looking like kings holding court. They had set out coffee and pastries, acting as if they were about to accept a surrender treaty from a defeated enemy. I parked my rental car around the corner and walked to the house. I watched from the sidewalk as a sleek black sedan pulled up. It was Henderson, my lawyer. He stepped out, looking grim and professional. Inside, Vince spotted him through the window. "Here comes the corporate lackey," he sneered, loud enough for me to hear as I approached the porch. "Look at him. He's probably terrified we're going to sue him into bankruptcy." Marissa smoothed her hair, putting on her best aggrieved tenant face. "Let me do the talking, Vince. I know how to handle these suits. We're going to get that $10,000 and finish the renovations." The footsteps on the porch were heavy. The knock was authoritative. "Come in, it's open," Marissa yelled, not even bothering to stand up. She wanted to show dominance. She wanted the owner to come to her. She had no idea that the power dynamic was about to shift so violently that it would leave her breathless. The door opened, and Henderson stepped aside. I walked in, wearing my charcoal suit, my face utterly devoid of emotion. Marissa's jaw dropped. She looked from me to Henderson, confused. "Jason, what are you doing here? We have a private meeting with the owner's representative. You need to leave immediately." Vince stood up, his face reddening. "Get out, kid. Grown-ups are talking business. Go wait in the car." I didn't say a word. I walked past them, past the stained carpet, and stood at the head of the dining table, my father's seat. I placed my briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gavel strike. "You have a meeting with the owner," I said calmly, pulling out the deed and the LLC incorporation papers. I slid them across the table until they rested right in front of my mother. "And you are looking at him." "I am Obsidian Holdings," I stated, my voice cold steel. "I am the landlord. I am the one you refused to pay. And I am the one evicting you." The color drained from Marissa's face so fast she looked like a ghost. She picked up the papers, her hands trembling violently. "No, this isn't possible. You don't have this kind of money. You're broke." Vince, however, wasn't ready to fold. He slammed his fist on the table, knocking over a coffee cup. "You think you can scare us? I don't care if you own the company. We have rights. We'll sue you for harassment. Eviction takes months in this state, and you can't touch us until a judge signs the order." I didn't flinch. I reached into my briefcase again and fanned out a series of high-resolution photos. The debris on the lawn, the destroyed banister, the dog scratching the door, and finally, a clear, zoomed-in shot of the illegal grow operation in the garage. "Sue me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Vince, you're growing a felony quantity of controlled substances in a rental property. That voids your lease immediately. I have already called the sheriff for a welfare check on the property." I checked my watch. "The police are en route. If you are still here when they arrive, you will be arrested as the operator of a drug den. I'd say you have about 10 minutes before the cruiser pulls up." The reality hit them like a freight train. There was no settlement check coming. There was no vacation. There was only prison time if they stayed. Marissa burst into tears. She didn't apologize for selling the house or trashing Dad's legacy. She played the only card she had left, the mother card. "Jason, please," she wailed, reaching for my hand across the table. "I'm your mother. If the police find that stuff, they'll arrest me too. I live here. You can't send your mother to jail." I pulled my hand away, looking at her with pity, but no regret. "You ceased to be my family when you sold Dad's legacy for a quick trip to Cabo. You chose the money. Now you have to live with the cost." Vince looked at the photos, then at the crying woman, and then at the door. He realized the game was over. Without a word, he grabbed his duffel bag. "Vince," Marissa gasped. "Where are you going?" "I'm not going down for this," he spat. He bolted out the back door, leaving Marissa alone in the living room she had destroyed, sobbing into the silence. By the time the police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, the house was empty. Marissa, terrified of being implicated in the grow-op, had grabbed her bags and fled the moment Vince ran. I met the officers at the door. I explained I was the landlord and had discovered the unauthorized gardening during an inspection. They took a report and seized the plants. Because the suspects had fled and I was the deed holder, the officers allowed me to secure the property once they cleared the evidence. I closed the front door. The heavy thud shut out the chaos. The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time in months, it felt peaceful. It felt like the house was breathing a sigh of relief. I walked to the mantel. I took my father's military medals out of my bag, wiped the dust off the glass, and placed them back in the center, exactly where they belonged. Then, I went to the front window. I took the "For Rent" sign down, snapped it over my knee, and tossed it into the trash. I picked up my dad's toolbox. I took out a drill and a fresh, heavy-duty deadbolt. As the drill whirred, biting into the wood, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just fixing a lock. I was sealing a wound. I turned the new key in the lock. Click. Smooth. Solid. Secure. I was finally home.
This story isn't just about real estate or legal loopholes. It is a powerful reminder that legacy is built on respect, not just ownership. Marissa and Vince believed that possession gave them the right to destroy, thinking that short-term pleasure was worth sacrificing long-term history. They judged Jason's silence as weakness, missing the fact that he was building a strategy while they were busy partying. The lesson: never mistake silence for defeat. Just because someone isn't screaming doesn't mean they aren't planning. True power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about holding the keys, literally and metaphorically. Respect your roots, protect your legacy, and remember, arrogance is a loan with a very high interest rate, and eventually life comes to collect. Thank you so much for following Jason's journey from the heartbroken son locked out in the rain to the master of his own destiny. It was an emotional ride of justice and restoration, and we hope you felt every moment of his triumph. If you enjoyed this story and love hearing about underdogs who prove everyone wrong, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Tell us in the comments. Do you think Jason was too harsh on his mother, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Type Team Justice if you think he did the right thing by evicting them. See you in the next story.